the night shift haunting. It was a quiet Tuesday night in a small town, where life moved slowly and the nights were eerily still. Jenna, a college student in her early 20s, worked part-time at the local McDonald's. She often picked up the late-night shifts, preferring the peace and quiet compared to the bustling daytime hours. For Jenna, these hours were an escape from her hectic schedule of classes and assignments. Most nights, the drive-thru saw only a handful of cars, and inside the restaurant, it was just her and her co-worker Sam cleaning and preparing for the next day. That particular night started like any other. Jenna arrived at work just before midnight, greeted Sam, and clocked in. Sam was in the back handling inventory, while Jenna managed the front, cleaning surfaces and restocking supplies. The two barely spoke, content to work in their respective areas and get through the quiet night. Jenna appreciated the solitude it gave her time to think and plan her week. Around 1:30 a.m., Sam left for his break, stepping outside for some fresh air. Jenna was now alone in the restaurant, a situation that didn't bother her much. She had done this countless times before. The hum of the kitchen equipment and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights were the only sounds accompanying her. Outside, the parking lot was empty, illuminated by the pale glow of streetlights. The world felt deserted, as it often did during these late hours. At 2 a.m., the first strange thing happened. While wiping down the counters, Jenna heard a faint tapping sound coming from the drive-thru speaker. She paused, her cleaning cloth in hand, and glanced at the monitors. The drive-thru cameras showed nothing but an empty lane. Assuming it was a glitch, she shrugged and continued cleaning. The sound came again, louder this time. It was persistent, almost rhythmic, like someone gently knocking. Curious but not yet alarmed, Jenna put on her drive-thru headset and said, "Welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you?" Her voice echoed slightly in her ears, but there was no response. She checked the monitors again, still nothing. A chill crept up her spine, but she brushed it off. Probably just interference, she muttered to herself, convincing herself it was a technical issue. A few minutes later, the tapping returned, more insistent this time. Jenna frowned and decided to check it out. She grabbed her jacket and stepped outside into the cool night air. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and a slight breeze rustled the trees in the distance. The parking lot was still empty, and the drive-thru lane was quiet. She walked toward the speaker, looking for anything unusual, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to turn back inside, something on the ground caught her eye. Near the drive-thru window lay a small toy clown doll, about 6 inches tall, with a painted smile that looked cheerful yet unsettling. Jenna bent down to pick it up, examining its worn features. Who would leave this here, she wondered aloud. As she held the doll, a faint giggle echoed from the drive-thru speaker. Jenna froze, her heart racing. She quickly turned around, scanning the area, but there was no one in sight. The giggle had sounded distant yet unmistakable. Feeling a surge of unease, she dropped the doll and hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Once inside, Jenna tried to shake off the strange encounter. She told herself it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. To distract herself, she focused on cleaning, scrubbing the counters with more vigor than necessary. But the sense of being watched lingered, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Not long after, Jenna heard the faint sound of footsteps coming from the lobby. She stopped what she was doing and listened carefully. The sound was soft at first, but grew louder, as if someone was walking toward the kitchen. "Sam," she called out, hoping her coworker had returned from his break. There was no response. Jenna grabbed her phone and checked the cameras. The live feed showed an empty lobby, yet the footsteps continued, clear and deliberate. Her breathing quickened as the footsteps grew louder, now seeming to echo through the empty restaurant. She backed away toward the kitchen, clutching her phone tightly. "Hello," she called again, her voice trembling. Still, there was no answer. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the restaurant into darkness for a brief moment before coming back on. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced around, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when she noticed that the clown doll was back. It was sitting on the counter, its painted eyes staring directly at her. Jenna's stomach dropped. She was certain she had left it outside. Panic set in as she grabbed the doll and threw it into the trash. She ran to the office and locked the door behind her, her hands trembling. She sat in the small room, trying to calm her racing heart. The office felt safe, insulated from the strange occurrences outside. But the sense of security didn't last long. A faint whisper broke the silence, sending chills down Jenna's spine. It was her name, repeated softly, "Jenna." "Jenna," the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the small office with an eerie chant. "Come play with us, Jenna." Jenna pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The whispers seemed to surround her, coming from every direction. Tears streamed down her face as she rocked back and forth, praying for the night to end. When morning finally came, Jenna's manager found her in the office, pale and trembling. She refused to speak about what had happened and left the restaurant without a word. She never returned to that McDonald's. Word of the incident spread among the employees, and the night shift soon became notorious for strange occurrences. Footsteps, whispers, and unexplained noises were reported regularly, especially near the drive-thru. Some say the clown doll still appears from time to time, always with that painted smile, waiting for its next victim. And as for Jenna, she never spoke of that night again, but she often woke from nightmares, haunted by the eerie chant, "Come play with us, Jenna." The freezer incident, a chilling tale. Tom had been working as a McDonald's manager for years. Over time, he'd grown used to the fast-paced environment and even the occasional strange event. Customers losing their tempers, odd complaints about food, and late-night chaos were all part of the job. But nothing could have prepared him for the terrifying night he spent in the walk-in freezer one winter evening. It started like any other shift. The restaurant was unusually quiet, and the night seemed to drag on. Only a few customers had come in, leaving the dining area nearly empty. The crew worked through their closing routines with ease, and by the time the clock hit 11 p.m., everyone was ready to go home. Tom stayed behind, as he often did, to finish up the final inventory check and make sure everything was in order. He grabbed his clipboard and headed to the back of the restaurant. The walk-in freezer was the last stop on his checklist. It was an industrial-sized freezer, large enough to store all the supplies the restaurant needed, from burger patties and fries to ice cream and milkshake ingredients. The air inside was always freezing, but tonight it felt colder than usual. A biting chill hit Tom as he opened the heavy door and stepped inside. The freezer was lit by a single dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. The light flickered slightly, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Tom rubbed his hands together to keep warm and began counting the boxes of frozen supplies. Everything seemed normal at first. He moved methodically, checking items off his list, his breath visible in the icy air. Then he heard it. A faint creaking sound. Tom paused, turning his head toward the freezer door. The sound grew louder, and to his disbelief, the door began to close slowly. "No way," he muttered under his breath, dropping his clipboard and rushing toward the door. But before he could reach it, the door slammed shut with a loud thud. For a moment, Tom stood frozen in place, staring at the closed door. He took a deep breath and tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The freezer door had a safety latch designed to prevent anyone from getting locked inside, but something was wrong. No matter how hard he pushed or pulled, the door wouldn't move. Panic began to set in as Tom realized he was trapped. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the restaurant was empty. The crew had all gone home, and the front doors were locked. His voice echoed in the small space, swallowed by the thick, freezing air. Tom's hands were already beginning to go numb, and the cold seemed to seep into his bones. Desperate, he reached for his phone. His hands trembled as he pulled it from his pocket, but to his horror, the screen wouldn't turn on. The freezing temperature had drained the battery. He cursed under his breath, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He needed to stay calm and think of a way out. As Tom leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath, something caught his eye. Frost was forming on the metal walls of the freezer. At first it seemed random, but as he stared closer, he noticed a pattern. The frost was shaping into letters. Slowly, the words became clear: "Get out." Tom's heart raced. His breath came in short gasps as he backed away from the wall. "This isn't real," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "I'm just imagining things," but deep down he knew what he saw. The words were etched in frost, unmistakable and terrifying. And then he heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the corner of the freezer. The sound sent a chill down his spine, even colder than the icy air around him. Slowly he turned his head toward the source of the noise. In the dim light, he saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. The figure didn't move at first, but Tom could feel its presence menacing and otherworldly. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The figure began to move, stepping toward him with slow, deliberate movements. Its footsteps crunched on the icy floor, each sound echoing in the small space. Tom backed away, his legs shaking, until he slipped on the frozen ground and fell hard. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he barely felt the pain. His eyes were fixed on the approaching figure. Just as the figure loomed over him, the freezer door burst open. A rush of warm air flooded the room, and Tom turned his head to see one of his crew members standing in the doorway. The employee had forgotten their keys and come back to retrieve them. They stared at Tom, who was sprawled on the floor, pale and shivering, his eyes wide with terror. The shadowy figure was gone. Tom scrambled to his feet and stumbled out of the freezer, mumbling his thanks to the crew member. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The memory of what he'd seen was burned into his mind, and he wanted nothing more than to get as far away from the freezer as possible. The next day, Tom handed in his resignation. He couldn't bring himself to return to the restaurant, let alone the freezer. When the new manager took over, they dismissed Tom's story as a hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. But the rumors started soon after. Other employees began reporting strange occurrences in the freezer doors locking on their own, unexplained cold spots, and the faint sound of growling in the distance. As the weeks went on, the incidents became more frequent. Some employees refused to go near the freezer, and others quit altogether. The restaurant's reputation took a hit as whispers of the haunted freezer spread through the community. Management tried to downplay the rumors, but they couldn't ignore the growing number of complaints. One night, a group of employees decided to investigate the freezer after hours. Armed with flashlights and recording equipment, they ventured inside, determined to find the source of the strange occurrences. What they experienced that night only added to the mystery. The frost on the walls returned, forming the same chilling message. Get out. The growling grew louder, and one employee claimed to have seen the shadowy figure lurking in the corner. Their recordings captured faint whispers and unexplained sounds, but the figure itself was never caught on camera. Despite their fear, the employees couldn't deny the truth of what they'd experienced. They shared their story with others, and soon the freezer became a local legend. People began calling it the frozen room, and some even dared each other to spend a night inside. Few were brave enough to try, and those who did always came out shaken and silent. Years later, the restaurant closed its doors for good. The building was left abandoned, and the frozen room became a part of local folklore. Some say the shadowy figure still lingers in the freezer, waiting for its next victim. Others believe the haunting was a manifestation of something darker, tied to the land itself. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: Tom's story was only the beginning of the terrifying legend of the frozen room. The forgotten play place. The McDonald's on Elm Street wasn't just another fast food spot. It had something special. It had a massive play place, the kind kids loved to explore. Parents brought their children from all over town, and the laughter and shouts of kids having fun filled the air. The bright, colorful tunnels, slides, and the ever-popular ball pit made it the heart of the restaurant. For years, it was the pride of the community. But times changed. As newer, flashier places opened up, fewer kids came to the play place. It wasn't the same anymore. The once shiny equipment started to look old, and the building's paint began to peel. The play place didn't see as many smiling faces. It became quiet. Over time, it grew dirty, with dust collecting on the slides and cobwebs forming in the corners. Finally, the restaurant decided to close it off for good, saying it wasn't safe for kids anymore. Years passed, and the play place just sat there forgotten. The area around it became storage space for cleaning supplies and unused furniture. Employees rarely went near it. Most of them didn't even think about the play place. But the few who did always felt uneasy when they walked by the locked door. Some said it felt like they were being watched, even though they knew no one was inside. Lisa had just started working at the McDonald's on Elm Street. She was new in town and needed a job, and this one seemed simple enough. On her third evening shift, her manager asked her to clean the storage area near the play place. Lisa didn't think much of it. She grabbed the cleaning supplies and headed to the back of the restaurant. The play place door stood at the end of the hallway. Lisa had heard a little about it from her coworkers. "That place gives me the creeps," one of them had said earlier that day. Another had joked, "Watch out for the ghost kids." Lisa had laughed it off, thinking they were just trying to mess with her. When she got to the hallway, Lisa noticed something strange. The play place door, which was supposed to be locked, was slightly open. She paused, unsure of what to do. Maybe someone had forgotten to lock it, she thought. She didn't want to get in trouble, so she decided to check it out and make sure everything was okay. Lisa pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was heavy and stale, with a faint smell of mildew. She shone her flashlight around the room. The play place looked nothing like the stories she had heard. The bright, cheerful colors were faded, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and the ball pit looked like it hadn't been touched in years. As she looked around, Lisa thought she saw something move in one of the tunnels. She froze, her heart racing. "Hello," she called out. Maybe an animal had gotten inside. She waited, but there was no answer. She told herself it was probably her imagination. But just as she turned to leave, she heard a soft giggle, high-pitched and echoing through the empty play place. Lisa's breath caught. The restaurant was closed, and there were no children inside. She slowly turned back and pointed her flashlight toward the sound. In the ball pit, she thought she saw a shadow move across the colorful balls. It was quick, almost too quick to see, but it was there. Fear crept over her. She wanted to leave, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. Finally, she forced herself to move and ran out of the play place. She went straight to her manager and told him what had happened. "I think there's something in the play place," she said, her voice shaky. Her manager raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I heard, laughing, and I saw something move in the ball pit," Lisa explained. The manager frowned. "Probably just your imagination. That place is old and creepy. It'll do that to you. Don't worry about it." Lisa didn't argue, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that night, as she was finishing her shift, she heard the giggle again. This time it was behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding. There, at the entrance to the play place, she saw them, two small, glowing eyes staring at her from the darkness. Before she could react, the door slammed shut, and the laughter echoed once more. Lisa didn't go back to work after that night. She couldn't explain what she had seen or heard, but she knew she couldn't stay at that McDonald's anymore. The play place remained locked, its secrets hidden, but Lisa would always remember the glowing eyes and the eerie laughter. Expanded detail of Lisa's encounter. When Lisa first saw the door ajar, she hesitated. Her flashlight beam wavered as she debated whether to enter. Part of her felt drawn to the mystery, while the other half warned her to leave it alone. But curiosity won. She stepped inside, her shoes crunching softly on the dusty floor. The tunnels loomed above her, silent and foreboding. The flashlight revealed scratches and marks on the plastic, as though time itself had clawed at the once beloved structure. Lisa stepped closer to the ball pit, her nose wrinkling at the musty smell. Something about the stillness unsettled her, but she told herself it was just an old play area, nothing more. Then came the giggle. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Lisa's hands trembled as she directed the flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a fleeting shadow darting through the ball pit. Her mind raced. Was it a child? A prank? An animal? None of those answers made sense. The restaurant was locked, and she hadn't seen anyone enter. She called out again, her voice trembling. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, pressing down on you, waiting for you to make the next move. Lisa backed away slowly, her flashlight shaking. That's when she heard it again, the giggle, this time closer. She felt a chill run down her spine. Turning quickly, Lisa aimed the light toward the entrance. It caught something small and dark slipping into one of the slides. Her breathing quickened. She wasn't sure what she had seen, but she didn't want to stay any longer to find out. She bolted out of the play place, the sound of her own footsteps echoing in her ears. The aftermath. Even after leaving the play place, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She told herself it was just her nerves, but every little sound made her jump. When she heard the giggle near the end of her shift, her fear returned full force. The glowing eyes were the last straw. They weren't human, they weren't animal, they were something else entirely. Lisa didn't stick around to find out more. She quit her job the next morning, leaving a note for her manager. Her coworkers whispered about her sudden departure. Some believed her story, while others thought she was making it up. But after Lisa left, more employees began to report strange occurrences near the play place. Shadows moving when no one was there, faint giggles late at night, and the feeling of being watched became common. The McDonald's eventually boarded up the play place entirely, turning it into storage. But those who worked there late at night still swore they could hear the laughter of unseen children echoing through the halls. The vanishing customer, an extended story. It was a cold and rainy evening in the city. The streets were quiet except for the occasional sound of cars driving through puddles and the faint hum of the neon lights outside the McDonald's. This particular McDonald's, located right in the middle of the bustling city, had seen its share of unusual events and customers, but nothing could compare to the mysterious visitor who arrived that evening. A quiet entrance. The man appeared out of nowhere, as if he had materialized from the rain itself. He was tall and unusually thin, with a dark coat that seemed too big for him. His hat, wide-brimmed and dripping with rainwater, cast a shadow over his face, making it hard to see his features. The staff noticed him right away. There was something unsettling about him, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. He walked slowly to the counter, his footsteps almost silent on the tiled floor. The young cashier, Emma, greeted him with her usual cheerful smile. "Hi there, what can I get for you tonight?" she asked. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked up just enough for Emma to see a glimpse of his pale skin and piercing eyes. Finally, he spoke in a deep, quiet voice. Just a coffee. Black. Emma punched in the order, feeling a slight chill as she handed him his cup. Here you go. Have a good evening. He gave a slight nod and walked to a table in the far corner of the restaurant near the window. The silent observer. The man sat down, placing his coffee carefully on the table. He didn't take off his coat or hat, even though the restaurant was warm and dry. Instead, he stared out the window, watching the rain pour down in heavy sheets. The city lights reflected in the puddles outside, creating a shimmering, dreamlike scene. The man didn't touch his coffee. He didn't move much at all. The employees couldn't help but notice him. It wasn't unusual for people to come in out of the rain, but something about this man felt different. Emma whispered to her coworker Jake, "Do you think he's okay? He's just been sitting there, not drinking his coffee or anything." Jake shrugged. Maybe he's waiting for someone. Or maybe he just likes the rain. Let's not bother him. Still, they kept glancing at the man throughout the evening. Every now and then, one of them would try to approach him, offering a refill or making small talk. Each time, he barely acknowledged them, giving only a slight shake of his head or a quiet no thank you. The disappearance. As the night wore on, the restaurant grew quieter. By 10 p.m., only a few customers remained. The rain outside showed no sign of letting up. The man in the corner finally stood up. He picked up his coffee cup, which was still full, and carried it to the trash can. He then walked toward the restroom at the back of the restaurant. The staff didn't think much of it at first. They assumed he would use the restroom and leave shortly afterward, but when it was almost closing time and he hadn't come out, they began to wonder. Emma looked at Jake. "Do you think he's okay? He's been in there a long time." Jake frowned. "I'll go check." Jake knocked on the restroom door. "Hey sir, are you all right in there?" "We're closing soon." There was no response. He knocked again, louder this time. "Sir?" Hello, still nothing. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, decided to intervene. She grabbed the master key and unlocked the door. The three of them stood back as the door swung open. The restroom was empty. A chilling discovery. At first they thought maybe he had slipped out while they weren't looking. But the only exit from the restroom was the door they had just unlocked. It didn't make sense. "Are you sure he didn't come out?" Karen asked, her voice a mix of confusion and concern. "Positive," Emma said. "We've been cleaning up and we would have seen him." Jake stepped into the restroom. The air inside felt strangely cold, much colder than the rest of the building. He looked around, but there was no sign of the man. Then he noticed the mirror. The mirror was fogged up even though there was no reason for it to be. Scrawled across the fogged surface were two words, "Thank you." Emma gasped. "What the?" Karen frowned. "Is this some kind of prank? Maybe he's hiding somewhere." They searched the entire restaurant, from the dining area to the kitchen and storage rooms. They even checked the security footage. The footage clearly showed the man walking into the restroom, but there was no footage of him coming out. Lingering mysteries. Over the next few days, the staff couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Who was the man? Where had he gone? And what did the message on the mirror mean? The story spread among the employees, each retelling becoming more dramatic than the last. Soon it wasn't just the staff who knew about the mysterious customer. Regular patrons began asking about it, and the story gained a life of its own. Strangely, on rainy nights, some employees claimed they could see the man sitting at the same corner table. He would appear briefly, staring out the window, and then vanish before anyone could approach him. Some dismissed it as a trick of the light or their imaginations. Others weren't so sure. An unsolved mystery. The McDonald's continued its daily operations, but the story of the disappearing customer never faded. New employees were told the tale during their first weeks on the job, and some even claimed to have seen the man themselves. Whether he was a ghost, a prankster, or something else entirely, no one could say for sure. But on rainy nights, when the wind howled and the streets glistened with water, the staff would glance at the corner table by the window. And sometimes, just for a moment, they thought they saw a tall man in a dark coat, sitting silently and watching the rain. The phantom drive-thru. It was a cold and quiet night at a small McDonald's in the countryside. The wind whistled through the empty streets, and the staff inside the restaurant were waiting for their shift to end. There were only two workers on duty, Sarah, the cashier, and Jake, the cook. It had been hours since the last customer, and they were growing bored. Suddenly, the drive-thru buzzer rang, breaking the silence. Sarah, startled, quickly put on her headset. "Welcome to McDonald's. "Can I take your order?" she said cheerfully, despite her surprise. The voice that replied was faint and crackly, like it was coming from a bad phone connection. "Just a coffee," the voice said softly. It was hard to make out, but Sarah thought it sounded like an older man. She entered the order into the system. "Please drive up to the first window," she said. Sarah waited at the window, but no car appeared. She glanced at the monitors that showed the drive-through lane. It was completely empty. She frowned and leaned out the window, looking both ways, but there was no sign of anyone. "Jake," she called to her coworker. "Can you check outside? Someone just ordered coffee, but I don't see a car." Jake, a tall and easygoing guy, shrugged and grabbed his jacket. "Sure," he said, heading out the back door. He walked around the parking lot, checking the drive-through lane and the surrounding area. After a few minutes, he came back inside. "Nobody's out there," he said, brushing off the cold. "Maybe they changed their mind and drove away." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling. The buzzer had gone off. Someone had spoken to her, but now there was no one. A few minutes later, the buzzer rang again. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She put on her headset and said, "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" This time, the voice was clearer, but it sent chills down her spine. "I'm here," the voice said. Sarah hesitated. "Where are you?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "Look behind you," the voice replied. Sarah froze. Slowly, she turned around, expecting to see someone standing there. But the kitchen was empty. Jake was in the back, cleaning up. She looked at the drive-through monitors again. The lot was still empty. The voice spoke again, repeating, "Look behind you. Look behind you." It became a chant, growing louder and more distorted. Sarah ripped off her headset and threw it on the counter. "Jake," she called, her voice shaking. Jake rushed over, alarmed by the panic in her voice. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sarah explained what had happened, her hands trembling. Jake frowned and picked up the headset. He listened, but the line was silent. "There's nothing," he said, trying to reassure her. "It's probably just a glitch in the system." Sarah nodded, but she didn't feel reassured. She avoided putting the headset back on and busied herself with cleaning the counter. Jake returned to his tasks, but he kept an eye on Sarah, worried about how shaken she seemed. As the night went on, the restaurant stayed quiet. The buzzer didn't ring again and no customers came, but Sarah couldn't relax. She kept glancing at the drive-through monitors, expecting to see something or someone. Finally, their shift ended and the morning crew arrived. Sarah was so relieved to leave that she didn't even tell them what had happened. She just grabbed her things and hurried out the door. Jake followed, still puzzled by the strange events. The next night, Sarah was scheduled to work again. She considered calling in sick, but she didn't want to leave Jake to handle the shift alone. So she showed up, trying to convince herself that it had all been in her head. At first, everything seemed normal. The hours passed slowly, and there were only a few customers. But then, just like the night before, the drive-through buzzer went off. Sarah froze. Jake looked at her and said, "Do you want me to get it?" She nodded, grateful. Jake put on the headset. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" he said. There was no response at first. Then, the same faint, crackly voice said, "Just a coffee." Jake entered the order and waited at the window. But just like before, no car appeared. He leaned out the window and looked around. "Hello," he called, but there was no answer. He turned to Sarah. "This is weird," he admitted. "Are you sure this happened last night too?" Sarah nodded, her face pale. "It's the same voice," she whispered. Jake decided to check the parking lot again. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness as he walked around the building. The lot was empty, just like before. When he came back inside, Sarah was staring at the drive-through monitors. "What is it?" he asked. "I thought I saw something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's gone now." Jake looked at the screens but saw nothing unusual. He tried to shake off the growing unease. "Let's just get through the night," he said. "It's probably just a prank." The nights that followed were more of the same. The buzzer would ring, the same voice would order coffee, and no car would show up. Sarah and Jake started dreading their shifts. They tried to laugh it off, telling each other it was just their imaginations, but deep down they both knew something was wrong. One night, Sarah decided to record the drive-through audio. When the buzzer went off, she hit the record button on her phone before answering. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" she said, her voice shaking. The voice replied, "Just a coffee." After a few minutes of waiting with no car in sight, she played back the recording. To her horror, the voice wasn't there. It was just silence. Sarah showed the recording to Jake, who looked just as disturbed as she felt. "What does this mean?" he asked. "I don't know," Sarah said. "But it's not normal." They decided to tell their manager the next morning. But when they explained everything, the manager just laughed. "You've been working too many late shifts," he said. "Take a night off and get some rest." Sarah and Jake were frustrated but decided not to push the issue. They knew what they had experienced, even if no one else believed them. One particularly quiet night, Sarah was alone in the restaurant. Jake had called in sick, so she was handling the shift by herself. She tried to stay busy, cleaning and restocking, but the silence was unnerving. Around midnight, the buzzer rang. Sarah's heart raced. She didn't want to answer, but she couldn't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, she put on the headset. "Welcome to McDonald's," she said. "Can I take your order?" The voice was louder this time, and it sounded angry. "Look behind you," it said. Sarah's hands shook as she turned around. The kitchen was empty, but she felt like someone was watching her. The drive-thru monitors flickered, and for a split second she thought she saw a shadow move across the screen. She ran to the storage room and locked the door, her heart pounding. She stayed there until the morning crew arrived. When they found her, she was pale and shaking, unable to explain what had happened. Over the next few weeks, other employees started experiencing strange things during their shifts. The drive-thru buzzer would go off, but there would be no cars. Voices would come through the headset, but no one was there. Some workers even reported seeing shadows moving in the parking lot. The story spread, and the McDonald's became known as the haunted drive-thru. Employees refused to work alone at night, and some even quit. The manager brought in technicians to check the drive-thru system, but they couldn't find anything wrong. Despite the strange events, the restaurant remained open. But on quiet nights, the buzzer still rings and faint voices can be heard asking for coffee. No one knows who or what is behind it, but one thing is certain: the phantom drive-thru is real, and it's not going away.